So we had some pretty interesting news out of the Vatican this week with Pope Leo XIV announcing he's going to start a new catechetical series focusing on Vatican II, even calling it a North Star for how we can approach the modern world. And this is good timing for me because, as I said a couple other times, the purpose of my channel is I wanted to kind of look through some of these documents, trying to show that they're not the horrible thing that a lot of traditionalists say they are, that they're heretical and they just disagree with everything in prior tradition. So this will be good. We can probably use this as sort of a launching point to discuss all these different documents and what's in them and why they're actually really good. For me, like being a traditionalist and then sort of having a lot of trouble with a lot of those teachings, when I looked at Vatican II and Bishop Barron, a lot of his stuff that talks about it, I think a lot of the stuff in there really helped me to maintain my Catholic faith and say, oh, here are some developments that were made that actually explain this a lot better, keep the main dogmatic principles while shifting some of the ordinary magisterium that can change. I have my last video talked about Pope Benedict, his 2005 speech to the Roman Curia at Christmas, where he talked about, hermeneutic of reform versus hermeneutic of discontinuity and how things can change. And the point of Vatican II is taking a different look at the modern world than had been. And he actually talks about how the Americans in our experiment with Enlightenment values and modernity and liberalism ended up kind of shifting the Catholic Church's perspective. They had more suspicion after the French Revolution, but then they, as he says in that 2005 speech, Vatican II was evidence that they kind of shifted and they were going to be a bit more open because they saw, religious freedom can actually leave room for the Catholic Church to fulfill its mission. So you don't have to see all this as suspicious. So this is all the kind of things that we can dive into. There's things about how the church relates to non-Christians, how it relates especially to Jews, how it relates to women, how it relates to, religious freedom, how we look at salvation, how we look at the church, the papacy versus the College of Bishops. So all this stuff is laid out in the documents. There's 4 constitutions and then a few other documents from the Second Vatican Council. So it'll be really exciting to look at that. First, let's just hear what the Pope has to say and we can dive into it a little more.
Dear brothers and sisters, we begin today a new series of catecheses dedicated to the Second Vatican Council and to reflecting on its documents. The work of the Council Fathers paved the way for a new ecclesial season, placing at its center the mystery of salvation and the unity between God and his people. At the same time, it opened the Church to seek dialogue with the people of goodwill for a more just and fraternal world.
So you can see already there's kind of a balance there. On the one hand, it's about God and, his plan of salvation and the unity of his people. So basically the Catholic Church is, the center of God's plan for salvation for everybody. That's on one side, but also the Council Fathers looked at how to have a better relationship with the rest of the world, how to connect with people of goodwill around the world, how, there's the documents like Nostra Aetate talk about how to relate to other people's dignitatis humanae, which is about religious freedom. How do we approach them? How do we see them? Do we see them as all or nothing, in or out? Or, as the council looked at it, more of a participatory way, where you can almost see it as like a mountain of participation with the church at the top, and then separated Christian brothers a little below that, monotheists a little below that, all the way down to different ways that people are related or joined to the church, where, we don't really want to say that God is not interacting with grace with anybody. There are ways, mysterious ways that we can't really put our finger on at times of how he's reaching out in grace and that people can respond to that grace. Everybody receives sufficient grace. So that's language you see in this for salvation, and then also for how to let people live and discover the truth with religious freedom. So as he's saying, there's the unity of salvation and God's plan and one united people, the Catholic Church, and then there's also a way to look at everybody else as they can be joined to us, they can be searching for truth, in ways that are not quite as strict as in and out, but more uses St. Thomas Aquinas' analogical or participatory metaphysics, which is something we can get into.
We see that the documents have lost none of their relevance and are pertinent to the demands and challenges of today.
Very important. So he's saying we're not backing away from anything in the documents. So the documents stand, that they haven't lost any relevance. They're extremely pertinent to everything going on in the modern world. So even if at the level of application, some of these things in there, maybe we can talk about, we can revisit, but what's in there is going to be our guiding, as he said, North Star. So we're going to continue to look at these documents for guidance, how to move forward in the modern world.
Closely studying the council documents will help us to be attentive interpreters of the signs of the times.
Interpreters of the signs of the times. That was something that John the 23rd, he was the Pope who called Vatican II. He didn't finish it out. Paul VI finished it out, but John the 23rd called the council, and he talked about being interpreters of the signs of the time. He talked about two kind of forces, ressourcement or ad fontes, which looks back to the sources from the very beginning. But then he also talked about aggiornamento, which is maybe more about the signs of the times and updating based on what we're seeing. So if you see the science tells you that the earth is obviously round, or that, you know, the sun is at the center of the solar system, or that evolution is true, things like that, that obvious facts come to our attention, you're going to have to incorporate that. Or you see that societies with religious freedom and freedom of speech and, you know, liberalized markets, they work a lot better than totalitarianism and things of that nature, where you see the signs of the times, you see what is causing problems, and where peace and justice and charity are absent due to systems and observations that we can make about the world, and where they aren't. So that's interpreting the signs of the time, where we're taking, you know, these timeless principles of the church, those dogmatic things that cannot change, and we're interpreting them based on what we know, because all truth is God's truth, and you can't, if you see something in front of your face that's obvious, you don't ignore it based on some past interpretation. The church is renewing itself based on the new information. So that's the aggiornamento, as Pope John the 23rd, the reason he called it, as I said, partly to call back the ressourcement, look at the beginning of Christian doctrine and the early church fathers. Also aggiornamento, what have we learned and how do we apply that, the signs of the times.
And to proclaim the gospel to all. As we make our journey of rediscovering the teachings of the Second Vatican Council, let us welcome the past with its rich tradition. Let us consider the present with its joys and its sorrows. And let's look toward the future with an urgent appeal for greater justice, love, and peace.
I think that was an interesting, it might be a, you know, olive branch a little bit to traditionalists, the way he said, you know, let's keep in mind the traditions. Let's, you know, look to the past for its traditions, the richness of our heritage. There's a lot of traditionalists that do look at the church from Vatican II to now and see nothing but, oh, you know, heresies, that they've changed all these things that shouldn't have been changed, that can't be changed, and maybe Rome isn't even Rome anymore. There's nobody on the chair. It's empty, and it's a fake church now, and the real church is in a strip mall down the street. There are these sedevacantists and SSPX and all these groups that reject the council and everything that happened there, and they've set up their own traditionalists. Well, there's also some loyal traditionalists, as I called in my last video, that they have some difficulty accepting the reforms. There were real reforms that were intended, as my last video showed, you know, looking at what did Pope Benedict say about this, what was their intention. It was for continuity at the top levels of doctrine that can't be changed, and discontinuity on some things from the lower levels of doctrine that can be changed. And, you know, some people don't want to accept those things that changed, and said, so there are traditionalists that, you know, they want to stay loyal to Rome, but they don't really, they say, oh, it's ambiguous, it's confusing, I don't really know how to take this. You know, there are ways to take it where you can maybe lean into tradition more while being loyal to Rome. And I think, you know, the Pope hopefully can reach out to them in a way and bring a lot of those people back in if they're willing to make concessions, you know, on all these issues that were meant to be reformed at Vatican II. But should be really interesting as it goes. You know, this will be probably, I don't know, this is from his general audiences, so I think maybe every week. I don't know how they're going to lay out this Vatican II series, but I'm kind of excited about it because I was trying to think about how to dive into it. You know, there's all these different documents, there's dogmatic constitutions and a bunch of other documents of slightly lesser weight, but also still, you know, having ordinary magisterial weight to them. There's a lot of them, and so it would take some time to work through them. It could be really interesting to follow this over time and get the historical background. Hopefully there's a lot of context given here on the state of things and why they changed and to what degree they can and cannot change, all of that. So we're going to keep an eye on this, and as they lay it out, we'll be reacting to some of it, making some more videos.